In times when the wind whispered stories of forgotten cities into the ears of wandering stars, Persepolis stood in the heart of Persia, a jewel carved from white marble and pure gold, a place where the sun bowed every morning before the majesty of Shah Ardisha. The scent of roses from endless gardens mingled here with the heavy smoke of rare incense and the rustle of the finest silk ever woven by human hands. But beneath this layer of beauty and power, something lay hidden that gold could not buy. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence of the palace corridors. In the midst of this wealth lived Amara, a princess whose name meant immortal, but who felt more like a fading star with each passing day. Her days were outlined from dawn until dusk. Music, poetry, the embroidery of intricate patterns that did not interest her. She knew every relief on the walls, every fish in the palace ponds. Her father, Shah Ardisha, loved her, but he loved her like the rarest gemstone in his treasury. A jewel meant to be seen and admired, but one that must never leave the safety of its velvet box. The turning point came on a hot afternoon when dust from the desert painted the sky red. Messengers arrived at the gates of Persepolis. They were not spice merchants, nor scholars seeking wisdom. They were men in dark armor, reeking of sweat and fear. Messengers of King Mazar of Sogdiana. Sogdiana was not an empire in the true sense of the word. It was a den of wolves, raiders, desert pirates, men who worshipped only the edge of their swords. King Mazar sent the Shah a clear message: marriage to Amara or total war that would turn Persepolis to ash. Amara stood behind a curtain in the throne room, listening to her father's trembling voice. "It is for peace, daughter," he told her later, his gaze avoiding her eyes. "Mazar is cruel, but if you become his queen, his sword will turn toward our enemies, not us." At that moment, Amara understood. Her freedom was to be the price for the Shah's peaceful sleep. She was to be sacrificed to a man of whom it was said his heart was carved from black obsidian. For the first time that night she felt her crown burning on her forehead like red-hot iron. When the moon rose over the palace, Amara did not go to sleep. She stood on the balcony and looked toward the northern horizon, where the mountains touched the sky. She knew that if she did nothing, in 3 days a caravan would take her to Sogdiana, from where there is no return. The decision came with the first morning breeze. It was not the decision of a princess, but of a woman who wanted to own her soul. She exchanged silk for simple linen, took off the rings that reminded her of shackles, and hid only the most essential gemstones in her belt for an emergency. The night guards were tired and used to the quiet. Amara slipped through a secret passage, known only to her and the ancient builders, reaching the rear stables. There, Shams, her loyal black stallion, awaited her. As the palace gate clicked shut quietly behind her, Amara looked back one last time. She saw the towers of Persepolis bathing in the moonlight. They were beautiful, but dead. She urged Shams into a gallop. Desert dust began to swirl under the hooves, and with every yard, the princess turned into a fleeing shadow. she headed toward the great forest in the north. She did not know what awaited her there, but she knew what she had left behind. For the first time, fate was in her own hands. The frantic flight lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. The desert dust gave way to hard earth, and the hot air of Persia gradually cooled as Amara approached the northern borders. Here, where the mountains rose to the sky like menacing fangs, the great forest began. It was an ancient labyrinth of trees, their canopies so thick that even at high noon, eternal twilight reigned beneath them. Amara, exhausted and with hands chafed from the rains, felt the forest swallowing her. The freedom she had longed for so much now began to taste of pine needles, damp earth, and the fear of the unknown. The silence of the forest was treacherous. It was not a silence of peace, but the silence of a hunter. Beneath her, Shams flickered his ears nervously. Suddenly, a snap echoed from the bushes. Before the princess could react, 3 figures barred her path. They were not soldiers, but scavengers, human hyenas who lived off the misfortune of travelers. They had filthy faces, hungry eyes, and held rusted but sharp scimitars. "Look at what wandered in," hissed the largest of them, grabbing Shams by the halter. Amara reached for the dagger at her side, but her hands were trembling. In that moment, she knew her journey might end before it truly began. "Let go of the horse." The voice was not a shout, but it cut like a blade. The bandits froze. From the shadow of an old oak, a young man stepped forward. He was not much older than Amara, wearing simple travel clothes, but the way he stood betrayed great strength. It was Kiyan. The bandits laughed at him, but their laughter did not last long. Kiyan moved with a speed that Amara had never seen in any palace guard. It was not a fight, it was a dance of steel. His sword left its scabbard in a flash of silver. After a few precise strikes and the sound of clashing metal, the bandits, realizing they had encountered someone far more dangerous, vanished into the thicket like beaten dogs. Kiyan sheathed his sword and approached Amara. His eyes were deep and calm, but they hid a sadness that Amara knew well. "Are you all right?" he asked. Amara tried to regain her royal dignity, even though her heart was pounding in her throat. "Thank you, stranger," she replied, suppressing the tremor in her voice. She did not say she was a princess. She did not say her father ruled half of the known world. "I am just running from my homeland, seeking a place to start over." Kiyan looked at her for a long time, as if he could see through her lies, but he only nodded. "I'm doing the same," he said softly. "I am fleeing from Sogdiana, from a kingdom that knows nothing but violence." Amara froze. This young man was fleeing from the empire of her hated betrothed. If only he knew that she was the price intended to buy peace for his people. And if she had known that the man who just saved her life carried the same blood in his veins as King Mazar. But in the dim light of the forest, they were just 2 strangers brought together by fate. "Let us go together then," she suggested. 2 can defend themselves better than 1. And so they headed further north. away from palaces and wars, toward a shared life of which neither had any idea just how fateful it would become. The journey that began in fear eventually led them into the embrace of the mountains, far from the golden gates of Persepolis, and even further from the cruel shores of Sogdiana. Amara and Kiyan found their sanctuary. It was a valley that the world seemed to have forgotten, a small village with houses made of earth and stone, where time was not measured by clocks, but by the sunrise over the mountain peaks and the scent of blooming almond trees. Here, on the edge of this quiet world, they built a modest home. There was no gold in it, but for the first time in years there was peace. Amara was no longer a princess, and Kiyan was no longer an outlaw. They were simply two people who chose to write their own destiny. Soon a sound began to echo through the valley that became the heartbeat of their new home. The rhythmic strikes of a hammer against an anvil. Kiyan set up a forge. It was no ordinary forge. People from far and wide soon began to whisper about a blacksmith whose steel was stronger than rock and lighter than a feather. Kiyan worked with fire with a respect and mastery he had learned in his childhood, but now his work served to create, not to destroy. And when the sun dipped toward the horizon and the village grew quiet, Kiyan would sometimes teach the young men of the village swordsmanship in the dim light of the forge. Not as preparation for war, but as the art of defense, the skill that once saved his life and brought him to Amara. While Kiyan tamed steel, Amara tamed silk and linen. Her fingers, once used to the idleness of palace life, now danced with a needle and thread. She sewed dresses that seemed to carry the colors of the Persian sky and the softness of a mountain breeze. The village women marveled at the intricate patterns and colors that Amara was able to conjure. No one suspected that those patterns were memories of the gardens she had to leave behind. In every stitch, Amara found a freedom she had never known in the palace. Her clothes were not a symbol of status, but of the joy of creation. She had surrendered her royal crown, but her craft made her the queen of the valley. Years flowed like a quiet river. Their love, born in the danger of the forest, only flourished in the tranquility of their home. Soon their house was filled with the laughter of children. First came Cyrus, a boy with Kiyan's eyes and courage in his heart, followed by Lele, a little girl who inherited her mother's beauty and sharp mind. Cyrus spent his days in the forge, fascinated by the sparks flying from the anvil, while Lele learned to distinguish the colors of threads under Amara's guidance. They were children of dust and stars, growing up in ignorance of their noble origin, surrounded only by the love of their parents and the rugged beauty of the mountains. It was a perfect life, a life they hadn't even dared to dream of before. But even in the happiest moments, as they sat by the fire at night watching their sleeping children, Amara and Kiyan exchanged looks that said it all. They knew that their past was like a sleeping dragon. They could bury it under layers of work and family happiness, but they could not erase it. The world out there, the world of kings, armies, and betrayal was still somewhere close. And deep in their souls, they both asked the same question. How long can the mountains protect us before fate comes for us once again? It was an afternoon like any other. The hot sun beat down on the village rooftops, and the air smelled of dry hay and metal. In the forge, Kiyan was just finishing an order for one of the local farmers, while Amara sat on the porch with Lele, teaching her the colors of thread. Everything seemed perfect. But then it happened. First, it was just a distant rhythmic sound. The thundering of hooves. It wasn't just one horse, there were many. A sudden restlessness descended upon the village, almost tangible. The birds in the treetops grew silent, as if they too felt that something was approaching, something that did not belong in this valley. 5 riders emerged from a cloud of dust. Their armor, coated in the grime of the road, shimmered dimly. They were soldiers. Their horses were tall, adorned with harnesses that Amara hadn't seen in 10 long years. Her heart stopped. These were no ordinary travelers. This was an elite patrol. They halted directly in front of Kiyan's forge. The leader of the patrol, a man with a wind-weathered face and a deep scar across his cheek, dismounted. His gaze was searching, professional. "We are looking for a blacksmith whose skill is spoken of as far as the lowlands," he said in a deep voice. Kiyan wiped the sweat from his forehead and stepped out from the shadows of the workshop, still clutching his heavy hammer. The soldiers began to walk through the workshop. They examined the swords hanging on the walls and tested the edges of the daggers. Their admiration was undisguised. "I haven't seen work like this even in the royal armories," one of them remarked, nodding appreciatively. Kiyan stood still, but his muscles were as tense as a drawn bowstring. Every word, every movement of the soldiers was like stepping on thin ice. Amara came out of the house to stand by her husband's side. She tried to look like a simple village woman, her hair pulled back in a scarf, her hands dusted with flour. But her posture, that innate pride that could not be entirely erased, betrayed her more than she realized. Suddenly, one of the younger soldiers, who had been silent until then, froze. He was staring at Amara. A flash of memory flickered in his eyes, at first uncertain, then shocked. He slowly dismounted, removed his helmet, and took a step forward. Before Amara could look away, the soldier dropped to one knee and bowed his head. "My lady." He exhaled softly, but in that sudden silence it sounded like a gunshot. "We have searched for you for so long. The entire empire mourns." Amara felt the blood drain from her face. Kiyan took an instinctive step toward her, his hand tightening around the hammer's handle. "You are mistaken, soldier," Amara said, her voice trying to remain steady. "I am but a blacksmith's wife. I know no such person." The soldier looked up, his face filled with confusion and reverence, but he did not back down. Meanwhile, the patrol leader turned to Kiyan. He studied him with narrowed eyes, as if piecing together a complex puzzle. "You remind me of someone, Blacksmith," he said slowly. "Those features, the way you hold a weapon. Have I seen you before? Perhaps in Sogdiana?" Kiyan returned the gaze without blinking. "I am just a blacksmith from the mountains. My face is the same as 1,000 others." The patrol eventually rode away. The dust settled, but the peace was gone. Amara and Kiyan stood before their home, watching the disappearing riders. They knew this was not the end. The secret they had carefully built for 10 years had just suffered its first fatal crack. The days following the patrol's visit passed in a strange, heavy timelessness. Every creak of the gate, every distant sound in the forest triggered a chilling shiver in Amara and Kiyan. Yet, they tried to maintain an appearance of normalcy for the sake of the children. Cyrus and Lael weren't supposed to suspect a thing. And so, when the day of Amara's birthday arrived, they decided to hold the celebration as planned. Modestly, in private, out on the blooming meadow in front of their house. The sun was shining. The tables were draped with Amara's most beautiful tablecloths, and the air smelled of fresh pastries. For a moment, it seemed as if the world out there had truly forgotten them. Just as Amara was blowing out the candle on a small cake and Cyrus was laughing, Kiyan suddenly froze. He placed his hand on the ground. He felt it before it could be heard. A faint tremor, a vibration that did not belong to the mountains. Amara noticed his expression, and her smile froze on her lips. From the distance, from where the valley opened into the lowlands, a sound emerged that resembled an approaching storm. But the sky was cloudless. It was the thundering of hooves. Thousands of hooves striking the parched earth. In the distance, a massive cloud of dust rose over the horizon, veiling the afternoon sun. Within minutes, the dust parted to reveal a sight that took their breath away. It wasn't just a patrol riding into the valley, it was an entire army. No, it was 2 armies. From the left approached an army in the colors of Persian saffron and turquoise, the guard of Amara's father, Shah Ardashir. From the right, however, surged a dark wave of Sogdian riders in colors of midnight blue and steel, led by the pirate raiders of King Mazar. 2 rival empires that had hated each other for 10 years were now converging. On the same point, the small house of a blacksmith on the edge of a forgotten village. The villagers fled in terror to their homes, bolting their shutters. In the middle of the meadow, only one family remained. Kiyan wrapped his arm around Amara's shoulders and pressed the children close to him. Cyrus looked at the gleaming armor with a child's wonder that quickly turned to dread, while Lael hid her face in her mother's dress. The armies halted in a perfect semicircle surrounding the house. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise of battle. The air was electric. In the front line, Amara saw the very same soldiers who had visited them a week ago. Their report had reached the ears of those Amara and Kiyan had been running from for an entire decade. 2 men rode out from the ranks of soldiers. Shah Ardashir, aged and with sadness in his eyes that was now turning into hope. And beside him, King Mazara, man whose name used to strike terror into Amara, but who now looked weary, like someone who had long been searching for something lost. Both kings halted their horses just a few paces from the family. Amara felt her knees give way. The trap had snapped shut. The past had caught up with them at the least expected moment, and with the greatest force. The struggle for freedom that had lasted 10 years reached its final reckoning right on the doorstep of their home. The silence that descended over the valley was so deep that one could hear the heartbeats of those standing in the center of the ring of steel. Amara felt Kiyan's hand on her shoulder. It was steady, but warm. Shah Ardashir dismounted his horse. His golden armor no longer held the luster it once had, but his gaze was sharper than ever. He took a few steps forward, his eyes fixed on the woman in simple clothes who stood before him with her head held high. Amara, the old king, exhaled, and in that single word was all the pain and relief of 10 years of searching. "My daughter, how long we have searched for you in the dust of the roads." Amara did not move. However, her gaze shifted to King Mazart, to the man she had once fled from into the darkness of the night. She expected anger. She expected chains and punishment for the humiliation her flight had caused him. But the ruler of Sogdiana was not looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Kiyan. Mazar's face, usually as hard as stone, trembled. "Son," the pirate king whispered so softly that only those closest could hear, "so this is where you have lived all these years? In the mountains and at the anvil?" Kiyan took a deep breath, looked at Amara, and then back at his father. "Yes, father," he answered firmly. The shock that rippled through the ranks of both armies was almost tangible. Two fugitives who had found each other in the forest were, in fact, the heirs to empires that had nearly destroyed each other because of them. King Mazar did something that none of his Sogdian warriors had ever seen. He cast aside his sword and stepped close to Amara. Kiyan tensed, but Mazar only bowed his head. Then slowly, with the difficulty of a man who had never bowed his back to anyone, he knelt in the dust of the road directly before the princess. "Forgive me, Amara," he said in a voice that was no longer the voice of a tyrant. "My pressure, my threats, it was the pride of a king who could not see the heart. For 10 years I watched my son vanish into a void, and only then did I understand what I had caused. Accept my apology." Amara looked at him for a long moment, then smiled gently at the king who once terrified her, and offered him her hand to help him rise. Mazar rose, but he did not return to his army. Instead, he took from his head his heavy iron crown, adorned with the fangs of desert beasts. He stepped before Kiyan and presented it to him with reverence. "Here's your inheritance, son, but rule better than I did. Rule with the wisdom you found at this anvil." Then he turned to his soldiers and cried out so powerfully that the rock shook, "Here is your new king, and his wife your queen." At that moment, as if on command, thousands of Sogdian warriors knelt in the dust with a clatter of armor. Then Shah Ardashir stepped forward. In his hands he held a delicate golden crown set with turquoise. "I wish your mother had lived to see this, Amara," he said with emotion. "This crown belonged to her, and it has been waiting for your head all this time." He placed the crown on his daughter's head, and his voice joined Mazar's. "People of Persia, bow to your new queen and your king." A Persian guard knelt as well. In the middle of the meadow, surrounded by kneeling armies and stunned villagers, stood a blacksmith and a seamstress, now the rulers of two united worlds. Behind them stood Cyrus and Lyle, watching as their simple world transformed into a legend that would be told for thousands of years. The return to Persepolis was not the return of prisoners, but a triumphal procession. The gates that Amara had once silently fled through in the night on the back of a black stallion now swung wide open for a new era. But Amara and Kiyan had not changed, though crowns shone upon their heads. Their hands still bore the marks of labor scars from the needle and calluses from the hammer. It was these very marks that reminded them that true power does not spring from blood, but from what one can create for others. The first decision of the new queen and king was to tear down the high walls surrounding the palace gardens. Persepolis became a city where everyone could breathe freely. The borders between Persia and Sogdiana, once lined with fortresses and fear, vanished. In their place grew a new road, the road of stars and dust. It was a commercial artery where Sogdian blacksmiths met Persian weavers. Kiyan brought to the administration of the empire the discipline and honor he had learned in the mountains, while Amara ruled with the wisdom and empathy of a woman who had known the life of the common people. There were no longer two rival countries, but one great kingdom that worshipped not the god of war, but the god of creativity and peace. Old Shah Ardashir and King Mazar spent their final days on shared terraces, watching their grandchildren, knowing with relief that their legacy was in better hands than theirs had ever been. Cyrus and Layla did not grow up in the isolation of a golden cage. Although they lived in the palace, Kiyan insisted that Cyrus spend his mornings in the workshops with the armorers, and Amara taught Lale that the beauty of a dress is meaningless unless a kind heart beats beneath it. They taught them that a crown is a burden to be worn with humility, not pride. One day, when Cyrus was a grown man, his father took him to that old anvil, which he had moved from the mountains to the heart of the palace. "Remember, son," Kiyan told him, "this is where our true throne was born. In work, in respect, and in the love for your mother. Never forget that dust, even when your footsteps echo on marble." The story of the princess who fled and the prince who became a blacksmith spread further than the borders of their empire. Travelers told it by the fires. Mothers whispered it to their children before sleep. It became a legend that fate is not carved in stone by kings, but that every person forges it themselves, strike by strike, stitch by stitch. That even the most golden cage is still just a cage, and that true wealth lies in the ability to choose one's own path, even if it leads through dangerous forests and parched deserts. When, after many, many years, Amara and Kiyan looked at the stars from their balcony for the last time, the same stars that had once guided them to freedom, they knew their task was fulfilled. They left the world better than they found it. The valley where they spent their 10 years of silence remained a protected place, a symbol of their beginning. And so, when the mountain wind whispers today in the treetops of the great forest, you can still hear the rhythmic strike of the hammer and the rustle of silk. The story of Amara and Kiyan does not end, because the freedom they found lives on in the heart of everyone who is not afraid to follow their dream. For the kingdom of dust and stars is within each of us.